class. So my goal is this will probably be a fairly short lecture, but we'll see how things ring out. So yes, you are being recorded, and here we go. Or this not you personally, but this class is being recorded. So 1 John 4:16. So we have come to know and to believe the love that God has for us. God is love, and whoever abides in love abides in God, and God abides in him. So what do people get from this particular verse? Any comments? Anything strikes me? To me, you can get lots of things from this. First of all, that God is love, and so he is always doing the loving thing for us and loves us beyond what we can comprehend. But it also points to, if what you're doing is not out of a place of love, then you are not being obedient in God's will for you. And it really is the true asset test when you're deciding whether you're doing is the godly thing to do. Is it coming from a place of love? And certainly I fail, and I imagine many of you fail at this quite frequently. So it's not necessarily an easy thing to do, but it is the ultimate barometer of what we just choose to do. For example, a big example of that is forgiveness. God has forgiven us and taken away our sin. And if we were to do the loving thing, we would forgive others as well, even those that severely hurt us. Okay, so administrative items. So the quiz on software applications and development agreements, copyright. I think the title of the article is copyright, but it's basically development agreements is what it focuses on. I think I saw that a lot of you have already taken the quiz, and there was one question that asked you to check multiple categories, and so I don't like the way that Canvas grades those, so most of you will see a bump up in the score if you missed one of the checkoff boxes. I raise the score because I don't like the way Canvas actually comes up with the amount of points that it gives. So hoping that helps people out. Wednesday, your work activity log is due, and also the promo video or project presentation. So which projects are pretty close to finishing or will have a submission of their promo video or project presentation completed fairly soon? Or does anyone have it ready to go, ready to submit right now? Anyone? Okay, I take that as a no. I don't hear responses. Wait, let me check the chat. I see something coming up in chat. Let's see. Oh, there we go. So Caden says they're on track to be finished by the deadline, and Brandon's saying they're close to being done. Good. Glad to hear that. I'm hoping the extra 1 hour of time plus the weekend gave you some opportunities to work on completing your project. Definitely is a sense of accomplishment to be able to come to a completion point on your projects. And Friday is the test plan and report. That's just basically picking out one area, not your whole program, but key functional areas of your project, creating a test plan, actually executing the test plan, and generating a report of the results of executing your test plan. So that just gives you a flavor of what writing a test plan looks like and how to do the report. Something that you will find valuable, even if you're not directly involved with software quality assurance. As a developer, you will need to be very in tune to that, and especially if you get into management as a software project manager or a project manager, their test plans and reports are critical to have good skills in. So, and then the other item is that there is an email going out requesting course evaluations. I don't know if it's already out, but I hear if it isn't already out, it's going out soon. Please provide feedback. That way, not only myself, but all your other professors can improve on their teaching techniques by taking feedback from the students and trying to learn from the evaluations. So any questions about the administrative things? I think things are pretty well laid out for our last week here. And again, remember that the offer that I put out there, that is, if you have no zeros for any of your assignments, that you can choose to not take the final and stay pat with the grade that you currently have. Again, but you have to have a non-zero grade for all the quizzes and assignments, and I will accept late assignments for partial credit if you would like to avoid taking the final. So,
do we need to reach out to you to confirm that or anything?
I would think it would be best just to make sure that we're on the same page. I don't know if it's actually a requirement, but for your own protection, I would.
Cool.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Regarding the assignments that we turned in, like the design documents and one of the other ones that we could resubmit for more credit, are we able to still do that?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
That offer never expires. I think it's mostly the requirements document and the design document that offer never expires. You can, up until the very end, you can resubmit that. So I guess the very end would be after finals. I will be doing grades, and once I've submitted the final grades, the window is closed. So I would say before the finals. And I think your final is scheduled for Wednesday at, I don't even know what time, but it doesn't matter because it's going to be done online. And so I've actually made it Wednesday at midnight kind of thing, just like you read all your other assignments. So that would be the same with resubmitting anything. All right, any other questions? Okay. Well, like I said, I've enjoyed teaching you. I just want you to make sure you know that I've really enjoyed, in particular, this semester's class. And let's see. So we did the high-level quick overview of the design patterns, and I thought I would go into a little bit more detail on a couple of them just so that you can get a feel for them. This is definitely not, I picked the ones that I felt was the most important to know. They were not random, but semi-random in my selections of the design patterns to discuss in more details. So the first one was chosen. It is an important one, but it was chosen because of how simple it is. It's just the case where you only want one instance of that object to exist in your system ever. Basically, it's a singleton manager or something that is in control, but you only want one of them to be in control of the system. If you had multiple, it would create problems. And so here's a little code snippet of how that would be created. We have a static variable here, singleton manager, and here's our instance. And then we make the constructor private so that it is not possible for any other class to instantiate it outside of this get instance method. So this is the method that I've created, that's been created here to create an instance of the object. You can see here that I've actually made it synchronized. This is for purposes of multi-threaded code so that it is thread safe. Certainly there is a performance penalty for making this synchronized. So for instance, if you know that this singleton is going to be used in multi-threaded code, then you could take off the synchronize. And there's all kinds of variants on this, depending on what your goals are, but this is the most straightforward. Remember again, I guess that's actually, I'm just going to say remember again. The operating system students will recognize that as synchronized is a monitor access, which simply states that only one thread can be using this or any of the synchronized methods in this, and this is Java, by the way, in this Java class, that any of the synchronized methods in the class here can only be executed by one thread at a time. So this is your entry point into the monitor for those of you in my operating system class. So then you just do simply if instance equals null, which means that there hasn't been a creation of it, then you say instance equals new singleton manager, and away you go. And then you just return, and then you return the instance. So you're either returning the instance that you just created here, if it didn't exist and you created it, or you're returning the instance right here that you created on another call, and just returning it. So that therefore you guarantee that there's only one, because if there's one already there, you don't create a new one. This is actually called lazy loading. So the advantage of this is that if this never gets called, you're not using the space for it. It's only on demand. The first time that you need it, it's called in. Now, if you know that your class will always be used and you'll always need it, and you could just put singleton manager instance equals new singleton manager here, and then just in your get instance just return it. That would be more efficient, because now you're always just returning the value that's already created. And so that's a situation where you would load it ahead of time, because you know that there always will be this singleton manager available, and there would be no need to do, first of all, the synchronized part, nor would there be any need to do the lazy loading here. So you'd remove this if condition here. So it all depends on how you envision this to be used, or if you'd use this in a case where you're trying to protect yourself in case there is a possibility that that you would not necessarily have a manager or things like that. That you could easily switch to the lazy, but you could always switch to the lazy loading as well. So this is a pretty straightforward example. So are there any questions about the singleton pattern? Okay. Didn't think so. It's pretty straightforward. Oops. There we go. So the other one I chose was because Jason actually tried to use this for one of his classes. I guess one of Dr. Boss's classes, right?
Emphasis on tried.
Yes. So I decided, okay, this one's definitely higher on the difficulty level. I think in a scale of 1 to 4, I think it's probably a 3. There are some more complicated behavior, but it's way up there on the complication scale of understanding. I wouldn't necessarily say it's the most important design pattern in the world, but it is a little bit more challenging, and you may have cases where you'd like to use this. So characteristics of the visitor pattern is that it allows you to add methods to classes of different or the same type with minimal changes to the classes. So again, you can take an existing class and add this functionality, and you only have to add a single method to the classes to allow you to add multiple methods to the class in a way that, well, this third point, which separates the behavioral logic from the objects to another class. So you're actually abstracting the behavior of these particular methods out from the class itself, but it's going to be executed within the scope of the class. And we'll kind of hopefully be able to describe why it is that you'd like to achieve this. And the other thing is, I think I mentioned in my description of it a pretty vague term that's double dispatch, and I'm hoping that you'll see where that comes into play, why we call it a double dispatch mechanism. And the other nice feature of this is you can change the behaviors of these methods by creating another visitor. So basically, you can create from this interface a series of different visitors and replace the behavior of all the classes that use this visitor pattern without actually changing the classes themselves, but instead create another class, a visitor class, that encapsulates that new behavior, and all the classes that use this visitor pattern automatically can get this change, new changes of behaviors for these methods. And you can actually have multiple of these behaviors being swapped in and out depending on what you want your application to do. So you can easily change and actually have multiple behaviors being active at the same time. So I'm taking advantage of Geeks for Geeks, which had an example, which I thought was pretty straightforward. There are lots of examples on the web and tutorials on visitor patterns. This is just, frankly, one of the first ones that I saw that, yeah, that looks pretty good. That looks acceptable. So I didn't do an extensive look. So if you're actually thinking that you might be wanting to use the design pattern, then, you know, this, I'm not saying this is the only source that you, or the preferred source of information on figuring out how to use the visitor pattern, but this is just one of the first ones I could quickly come up last night with. It was actually after midnight because my grandson went to bed late, so I was definitely taking the shortest route I could to creating this lecture here. So here's the overview. I think this is pretty straightforward in terms of what I presented before, but you have visitable classes which have an accept method. So they are the receivers of the visitor, and basically the accept method is I'm accepting a visit from the visitor. And then the visitor actually has a visit method which says, okay, I'm going to be visiting this structure. So that's sort of the basic layout, but let's look at the UML diagram that they've nicely created. So here's a class diagram. And I'm trying to figure out if I can get rid of this ad. I'll probably end up getting the ad going instead of stopping it. So anyway.
Yeah, there's the teeny little hide ad on the top right below start.
Right there.
Who knows if it actually will.
I know. It'd probably start up, with my luck, it'd probably start up the ad. So
you clicked hide, that means you want to see a video, right?
Right. So yes, are we doing good at Web Allocated, or yeah. So
the answer is no.
Yeah. So here's your client, which has an object structure. So this is your class definition for the client. So your client has a particular data encapsulation and a set of methods that operate on that class. on that data type and that class, but you want to abstract out the behavior to be more generic. And so what we have here is an element which is accept. So this within this client object structure, the class definition, you have an accept method, which can accept concrete element A, concrete element B, and basically this comes across in terms of different data types is the way that these different concrete elements will be different. And then we have concrete visitors, and this is the, so here's the visitor and different concrete visitors that inherit from the visitor. So this is an interface. So this is an interface that we conform to that gets created. And you can see here that it implements a method visit concrete element A and visit with concrete element B as the types of objects that this particular class. So you're doing an override. You're doing not an override. I'm sorry. You're doing. I just went blank on the term. It was the term that I was explaining to. Was it my it was my operating system class. No, my software engineering class. But you're overloading this method so that you can have different types. Oh yeah, I think this was in context to the statement that said if you're using a switch statement, it's an indication that you could be using overloading and you're not taking advantage of object-oriented. So here's an example of overloading where we have a method and you have an overloaded methods with different types. So depending on what type is passed, you are actually calling a different method. Again, they're both visit methods, but it depends on the type of the argument which of these gets called. And then the neat thing is, so here's your visitor, which actually the visitor is going to be executing the behaviors that it wants. So this is where you encapsulate the behaviors of these particular methods. And the neat thing is, and we'll see this hopefully a little later, and I'll describe it in a little bit more depth, is that you could have multiple visitors that implement this visitor interface. And that's this visitor 1 and visitor 2. And you could have completely different behaviors and swap in different behaviors with different implementations of the visitor interface that you've created. So here are the terms. We talked about the client and the visitor, which is actually implementing the behavior. Concrete visitors are specific implementations of the interface. And then visitable is the accept operation. So you make your client visitable by implementing the visitable interface, which it basically adds the fact that you accept a visitor. You have the accept method. And then the concrete visitables are just the different visitable implementations that you create. So here we can see this is again in Java. We see here that here's your accept. So this is the interface that will be implemented by all the visitable objects. They create this, they implement this interface. And so here we have a class, a client. I think this is a client class. Yes, that implements this interface. Item element is the name they gave it. And from that, you can see here, this is the method that is created to make it visitable. And so we see here, we accept shopping cart visitor, and what happens is all this accept method does is takes the visitor class, that argument that's passed, the object that's passed in as an argument, and executes its visit object with a pointer to this class. So it is functioning based on this element class here, an instance of this class, that you're going to execute the visit. So notice that as the visited or the visitable object, that you really don't need to know much about what is actually happening, that you're just calling the visit method on this object. So this is the first dispatch. So here we do the accept, I'm sorry, that should be the second dispatch. We do the accept, and then we actually call a method in the visit. We call the visit method for the visitor class. And so here, this is where the term double dispatch comes in, that you're calling this method, you get accept, and then you call another method in the visitor so that it is deferred. And that's where the term double dispatch comes in. So taking this forward a little bit further, it looks like we have a grocery shopping type of situation. So we have class fruit implements this item element that we have here, right? So it allows this accept pattern. So here we have fruit, and the price is set, price per kilogram, and the name of the fruit, etc. We get the price per kilogram, get the weight, get the name, and here we have the accept method. Again, it's this generic pattern that this doesn't necessarily have to be. I guess this is. So this is an abstract class. So you could just rely on the fact that if we implement, this is implementing item element. Sorry, you could actually have an abstract class that has this, and so you wouldn't have to rewrite this over and over again. But this is probably more illustrative of exactly what's going on. So here we have the shopping cart visitor, and here's the interface. And so here we can see that there are two types of things. Oh, actually, it's not a grocery store. You can visit with a book, or you could visit with some fruit. Okay, so it's a very interesting grocery store, or interesting store we have here. It's a super Walmart or super store, which sells multiple types of items. So here we see that this particular implementation of the visitor, shopping cart visitor, has the visit book and the visit fruit method. So here we can see that depending on the argument, when we get the visit, we are calculating the cost of the item. So when we execute this accept of the visitor dot visit this, we get the object, and then we have different behaviors depending on what object is actually being visited. So it's actually determined by the object that's being visited. So here we see a book, and so there's various calculations that the price is greater than $50, we give them a $5 discount, et cetera, et cetera. We print out ISBN number. And then for the fruit, we actually are calculating based on the price per kilogram and the weight, and we're calculating on the cost per weight times the weight to get the actual cost of the fruit. So we can see here that for this particular implementation, we have these two particular classes that it services. And so here is the shopping cart client, which is basically just setting up all the different elements. So we have books and pieces of fruit, and then we say calculate the price of the items, which is this method down here, and in calculate price of these items, which consist of books and fruit. We then see that we create a shopping cart visitor, which is this specific implementation here. And we just say, we start summing up the price of the items in the cart to figure out how much the total cost for the person checking out with this cart would be. And so there's just sum plus item dot accept visitor. So here we can see that we have the item and we're actually doing this first dispatch of the accept with this visitor class that we created, and the visitor has this particular implementation. Now, this is all fine and good. You say, oh, we can abstract it, but where's the huge advantage with all this complication? Where is the advantage? The advantage comes from, and that's actually not really, I guess they do discuss the advantages and disadvantages, but don't have a code example. But the advantages, let's say you're having a special tax-free situation, or you have a sale, or you're doing some type of promotion in you could actually implement a different version of shopping cart visitor that says tax-free holiday or grand opening prices that implement the shopping cart visitor. And therefore, you can down here totally change the behavior by creating a different instance of the visitor and visiting with that different implementation of the visitor. So you can have multiple Labor Day sales in this example, or like I said, a grand opening or tax-free holiday in April, or whatever promo or different pricing structure you want to allow. You just create a different visitor, and that different visitor doesn't have to be implemented in all of the visitable classes. Their behavior is, again, just this simple accept. It's just this boilerplate code, or like I said, you could actually inherit it from an abstract class, but it's this boilerplate code that always remains the same no matter what you want to do to change the behavior. So that's the advantage of the visitor pattern. And I think you all remember I was talking about I had a situation where I knew more information and got away from the visitor pattern, and I can't remember exactly the details, but I was getting some type of command over the network, and I only knew that it was in a certain category of commands that I was receiving. This is DICOM, which is the standard communication language between medical devices for sharing medical information, like your patient management system, your different devices, your different clinical software, etc. Merging them all together is the standard. And the situation I had here was I was getting in an object and I didn't really know what type of object it was. And so I used the visitor pattern that it would then be able to decipher what type it was and do the appropriate action. But again, that was a situation, and I don't remember the exact details, but I knew some information more than is assumed in the visitor pattern, which allows me to, or prompted me to move away from using the visitor pattern. But that is the visitor pattern. Are there any questions about that? You can certainly, like I said, there's lots of online resources, and I'm hoping with this direct demonstration of how the visitor pattern and interactive presentation of what the visitor pattern entails and what it looks like and why you would use it. I'm hoping this will at least give you a head start, and then if you ever get in a situation like Jason and have to or are required to or need to or have a situation where the visitor pattern you think might apply, I'm hoping this gives you the background that you can look on some of the online resources, remind yourself and fill in some of the details and go from there. So it gives you a head start in trying to decipher this somewhat complicated design pattern. All right, so any questions about the class or the design patterns I went over here? All right. Well, I would like to go ahead and then give you the rest of this hour, hopefully maybe to meet with your partners and discuss any fine points that you need to do to work out as your team to finish up your project and what actually needs to be done for some of these assignments coming up and finishing your projects. I'm looking forward to seeing your submissions, and yeah, if you can get your submissions in early, boy, that would be nice on me, so I have a chance to see them. But unless there are any questions, I'm going to go ahead and dismiss you.